Hey there, it's Frank with thinkmoat. Today, we're going to talk about building API services with Trello. Why would we ever want to do this? Imagine you have a lot of different users who use Trello, right? And these different users can get real-time information to them and their boards without you having to do anything more than just do the push. What's beautiful about this is if you have like a machine learning, for example, that evaluates stocks every night, predicts what could be best tomorrow, you can push that to the user in real time, and the user can see in their chart where you can see the actual stock now being, and maybe even prediction of why that might be the best one. There's so many ways you can use Trello that can connect to all the users in real time, dynamically giving them information to them using the API. So we get into actually using the API and building a service that can use this API. Let's get started. One of the things you can do is you can start by going into Trello and you can look at the Trello board. So you look at that, type that in, Trello. Okay, so we're gonna look at the Trello API. So get a sense of what it is that you're actually looking at. If you read through the page, you come down, you see something like HTTP, the Trello.com/app key. You can click on that, and in here you'll be able to see here's your developer app key, and your token that's generated for you. You have to generate your token, so you got to authorize, which means in order to authorize it, you have to accept. You have to already have an account first with Trello. You can't just go in as API. You have to have an account first to get a token, so you can start using and testing things as yourself. You're gonna get one token, I believe, but you're able to put your tokens in. And here, the thing you should also know is when you're going to create you have your API key, you have your token. The thing you got to do to be sure is you have to have a reverse proxy or a reverse kind of a URL that you can go to and say, okay, this is a true URL that we can accept. So now you have your setup on there. Let's get started within the actual application. For using Visual Studio Code here, I like it's one of the best ones out there in the market. I think it's probably pretty proficient and good at doing what you need to do. So go ahead and come in here. You create a new project called Trello, right? Make sure you put in the correct path, location you will put it in. And then now you save the workspace because you're using Visual Studio Code. We'll have the code open and have an empty project. And I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna create the actual folder directories first. So build them out now. Okay, so after we build out the folder directories, now I'm gonna go ahead and create a couple of these configuration files. These configuration files are important because they're actually connected into the application. One, the config file is used for getting into all of the API services as a developer. So if you have your application running, here's your services. Of course, this doesn't meet the whole security scan and going through, so mindful that you have to pull this out later on to build it so you don't actually have these API keys and these data, this information actually sitting within the service. You know, that's not best practice, but we're doing it now so we can kind of show you how to start using it. And then you can start abstracting that out later on and using the API service yourself. So we'll put this in here for now. Also, we'll create a user config since you got a token for you as a user through the developer API for Trello. You want to go ahead and say, okay, how can I use that information? So you create a config file for that. So I'm going to go ahead and create these configuration files real quick. After you start building your configuration files, you have that ready to go. Some things we need to do to make sure that we have the system built properly. So we're going to need a few helper functions to be able to do this right. Now, you may already have these things. You don't need to actually build them yourself, but you probably should at least have these in your code package. So what I have in mind is a fetch .php file and a file.php file. The most important one is the fetch file, because typically you need to be able to fetch the data, and this is the specific get, put, post, and delete. These methods are important because when you're building your code out in the API, Trello forces these things. So you need to make sure that you create a proper post, a proper delete, a proper get, and a proper put. Where put is the update, post is the create, delete of course is delete, and get is the fetching. So typical CRUD information here, you should be able to put that into your application. So we're going to build this out and start making sure that all these parts are there. So we'll get into it right now. Now that we have the fetch file set up and we know how that looks and set up with the post and get, delete, like I mentioned, now we can connect into that and be able to send our code to, technically it can go to any API per se, but you can reuse this piece. But right now we're just talking about it for Trello purposes. So you can go in and use that. Now that we have that fetch function ready to use, now we can also call the API, call the actual URL. We have all that stuff kind of set into the code set. All right, so the next thing we want to get into, now that we have our file and our fetch up and running, now we need to start creating the objects. These objects are the cards, the Trello list, and the boards to kind of like reflect what we have in the API. So I'm gonna open the API up from the website and kind of look at that while I create these different cards.
Perfect.
I'll be mindful as well that I've already kind of built this already, so it's not like it's something I've done from scratch automatically. I did it before I created the video. So some things you might see copied in, well, it's because I kind of have something already going. I'm just gonna copy in, so I have to spend the time working on it. But you can kind of see where we started from, and then we use some of the code to kind of fill the pieces in. So I'm gonna show how you build out the board, and then we'll go fill in the other parts.
Perfect.
So now that we got that under control, now we have all of our cards ready and built out. Now we have the objects, we have the configuration set up, we have all the different pieces to kind of connect into the API Trello. Now let's get into the actual meat and potatoes of this, which is now create a Trello card, create a Trello board, creating a Trello list, and we'll create these particular methods along with their hooks in a moment. So just watch this and we'll see how we build it. Okay, so you can see here, I'm gonna create 3 parts. I'm gonna create the Trello board, Okay, so I'm gonna create 3 parts and one additional hook. So I'm gonna create the board, the cards, and the list. And then once I create these parts, then I'm gonna go ahead and use all those and the hook. So I'm gonna create the board, cards, and lists. Okay, so now we have the Trello board, the Trello list, the Trello card, the Trello hook, all in now. Now they all supposed to do what they're supposed to do. They're supposed to be able to connect in to the physical API at Trello. So, for example, I look at the Trello board, for example, right? You can see at the top here, you have all the boards you can connect into, get all the boards with the API. So the reason why we're using this here, you can see https:// Trello.com version 1. The reason why I'm showing it here, typically what you want to do is, since you're going to reuse this over and over again, you should make this into a method and call it in every time through some kind of extension. What I've done instead was showing it because you can see the actual https:// you can see all that there and see, okay, that is the connection string to the actual API. I'm showing it so that you can kind of see what I'm showing here, so you can see what it means. The reason I'm showing it is you can see the actual connection string I'm making to the API. To that connection string here /action, and then the ID. So be mindful of all the parts. So in the configuration file, you have the token key. You have the API key, you have the token, is for the application. Okay, for the user, you have an ID and then you have a board ID. These are important. The ID for the user is literally given by the token that is able for the developer to connect into that user ID and look at all their boards, and of course all the boards. So so basically what the ID does is gives the developer access to the user's ID, which is access to all the boards, list, and the cards. So this is why we use that the IDs here is important for connecting into the board. Okay, so over here you can see get board. So I provided a board ID, and you can actually get into and see the different boards you connect into. So I give it a board ID, which is nothing more than a string text, and which is, I've shown this before. Here's a string of the board, and voila, you return back the actual board, which could also include the board ID and maybe the list associated with that board. So you can go through the whole board part. The same thing for the cards and the same thing for the list. Each one of them provides you with the data specific, and I have different methods here that can connect into that board. What I also do is I use a query string to be able to connect into it. So it makes it a little easier for me, especially when I'm trying to recreate these over and over again, that the same API key and the same token keys are already available for me. And then I can also connect in through the different names from the card per se, or from the name of the board. I'm able to put that in with their names, and voila, I have the generated query string to send to the API, which I can get back data, or I can update something in that particular way. So now that we have all this here, now what? So I have created the Trello hook. The Trello hook is nothing more than just compiling these 3 different board cards and lists together. The reason why I created this hook is because some things are not exactly that easy to get. So you can't just say, okay, hey, I want a card. Well, I don't know what the ID is as a card, right? Or I want this list, but technically I don't know the list name or the list ID. So what you do is I say, okay, in hook, give me the board. At least if you know the board name, from there we can start going in and start building, updating, building out whatever. So I at least say input the board ID, which is a string. After that, we can get the list. So we do this big mapping. So we have in here a few more things that we haven't talked about yet. So in the core functions, we're going to build something called the Trello model up top here. So I'm going to build this out, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, since I've already kind of built this, I'm going to go ahead and I just copied it in, and you kind of see what I'm talking about. So Trello mapping here is a board that takes in the user. So I pull in the user as in the constructor, right? And the user, along with the ID from the user, I can just say, hey, I can build a board out from this user automatically. And I can start, getting the board, the cards, the list, all of that. And I can get the list, the card associated with each list, and the list associated with the board. It's wonderful. And that way, and I return back the board. It's a little expensive because if you don't want to do this every time you start up a new process, it takes a lot. I probably say these one of the things you want to use just to initialize it. It's okay, let me initialize this board, right? Once you initialize a board, save that board in memory. I wouldn't use that board over and over and over again. Just initialize it in memory, and whenever you alter that board, that will change the state of the board, but don't keep initializing the board. This is good for initialization. So now that you have the model here, that will allow you to create a board and get the state of that board. At all times, you update. Remember, we have the different get, put, delete, and post. You can then just use those methods to update that board. And then you come back here and say, okay, now let me test this out. Let me see how this works. All right, so I created a Trello.php file in here. Let's go ahead and create that. Okay, so I'm gonna open this up. All right, so I'm gonna go in here and I'm gonna type in here, or I'm copy pasting here, and then I'm gonna go and kind of look at two different examples. The first example is gonna be, hey, I have a card I want to add in, and I'm gonna show you how to add a card in. Then afterwards, I'm gonna show how to add in a list. So you can see how both sides work here. And once you build those two pieces out, it's amazing how you can really alter Trello just using PHP. Here's the thing about PHP. PHP is just a tool. What makes it really, really nimble against other languages is that PHP does not have to be installed. You just take the files from some zip file and you just put it on your computer. Try to put it in your C drive at least, or somewhere that's kind of global. But you can just call on that. You set your environment variables, and voila, you're using the code set. So in here, I have my environment variables already set to use the PHP 7.2 right now. I need to update that, but to set it to environment levels, I set the environment variables to use PHP. So I can just PowerShell it in, and voila, I have my code running. So I'm gonna go ahead and I'm gonna run this, and what it's gonna do is gonna connect into and build it. All right, so here we go. So it ran it, and you can see here up top on the left hand side, you can see, oh, there's my text there. See that under the subscribe portion? There you go. And that's just adding in a card, right? So I'm gonna do the same thing again, but I'm gonna rewrite the code so you can actually see it run and for a list. So I'm gonna rewrite this a little bit. So I'm gonna write this for a list. All right. So. Okay, so now I think I got it right for a list. I got had a few hiccups and realizing that I may have forgot to actually call the actual list ID. Now it works. So I'm gonna go ahead and run it. Boop. Let's see. Okay, so now I added as you can see on the left hand side too up top, I added in the list for right under that. So add it to the front. So add a new list to the front. If I actually set the position of the list to say 2, for example, it would be behind the one that was already there, behind the click describe. I added a new list in. It went to the front of the line as the first one. So because I kind of think I default to 1 in my position, so automatically it made the first one. Maybe if I didn't default to anything, or at least not created anything, maybe it would not have done it. I don't know. So anyway, it's there. So now we can see 2 of them running at the same time. Now that's amazing. That's how you run Trello. That's how you get Trello up and running. And if you have any questions, let me know. But to finalize everything, this is what I built. I built something to be dynamic, working on this machine learning process I'm running. So you can see here in real time how it's being altered in Trello. And I might be hitting Trello kind of strong, but we'll see what happens. I'm trying to meet my limit on my number of calls. So they say, you can't make more than 300 calls per 10 seconds, and for a certain token, no more than 100 per 10 seconds. So since I'm only doing 1 token right now, I have many more tokens, but I'm testing on 1 token. We shouldn't have that much of an issue, hopefully. But you can see here I'm running it. So you see here as I run this PowerShell function. Okay, so you can see here as the PowerShell begins to run up, it begins to start deleting the board out because I have a function to delete the cards in the board. And as you delete the cards in the board, all of a sudden you get to see they start filling up with information based on things that have been processing, and you can fill the cards out automatically. So if you have a system that can automatically do a lot of its own processing, you can use Trello to automatically update and trigger in real time. And the wonderful thing about Trello is you can do this for any one of your boards. So this is very promising. Now, of course, if you begin to scale, you might want to use your own personal website or your own applications. But if you're trying to get things out to people in real time on their boards, and then you can use they connect into your system using their boards, they can get real time information from you without you having to do anything. I mean, you technically don't have to really build an app for this, but it's very, very helpful to do something like this. So thanks for watching, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.